Today's material will not be about the tribes that in one way or another participated in the Great Migration of peoples. In particular, for the simple reason that this tribe is not Germanic. Yes, and in principle, it is not very much damage to the Roman possessions. Just a half-destroyed Roman province and countless raids for 4 centuries. Wild, dangerous, and incredibly daring, they distinguished themselves by giving the Ninth Legion Teutoburg, and also by the fact that in the history of Roman Britain, they were never conquered, although the opportunity was there. Having discouraged them, they remained a constant threat to the Romano-Britons, and in the end, they were one of the 2 reasons for their demise. Today we're going to talk about the Picts. The Picts are a mysterious people. Scholars still argue about who they were and how they came to Britain. To simplify, there are 4 versions of their origin. First, they are relatives of the Iberians, that is, the indigenous Spanish peoples, at least so believed Caesar himself. The second, they are Celts, that is, relatives of the Gauls and Britons, quite a probable version. Third, the Picts and their kin, the Scots, are Scythians who moved to Britain. Fourth, they were not Indo-Europeans at all. Most scientists adhere to the second version, and it would seem that we can just look at the language as we did in previous videos, but no. The writing of the Picts has reached us, but the language itself, no. And how it sounded, we do not know, only names and separate words, which is clearly not enough to determine the place of origin of the Picts. They definitely had it. It is mentioned by the historian and theologian Beda the Honorable in the Ecclesiastical History of the People of the Angles. But whether it was another dialect of Celtic or something separate, we cannot know, and we are unlikely to know. Some scientists assume that it was a language related to the Basque language, others that it was an ancient Celtic language. Most likely it was one of the Celtic languages. This is evidenced by the names of various places and settlements in the north of Britain, where the Picts lived, and names that are clearly of Celtic origin. There is a version that the Picts had 2 languages, of which one was ritual and the other was spoken. There are no other clues. Even the word Pict is hardly a self-name of the people, because in Latin, pictii means painted or painted. It is a very appropriate name for this people, and you will later learn why. But the Picts themselves, even if they were not originally Celts, had become quite similar to them by the time Roman historians learned about them, as evidenced by their culture and religion. For example, the Picts had a great authority Druids. Speaking of higher powers, we don't know a single name from the Pictish pantheon of gods, but their images and descriptions are very similar to the Gaulish and Brittonic gods. For example, a Scottish farmer who lived in the village of Reni dug up a 2-meter stone with a carved image of a bearded man with a long nose, sharp teeth, and an axe. It most likely depicts Jesus, the master of nature in Celtic mythology. Further evidence that the Picts practice Celtic paganism is the woman on horseback depicted on a slab in County Ross. It is 100% the Celtic goddess of herding, Epona. The Picts were similar to the Celts in their clothing and weaponry. Like the Celts, the Picts used axes and spathas, a short sword that the Roman cavalry later borrowed from the Gauls, and which later evolved into a whole host of other swords. At the same time, they preferred slingshots and darts for ranged combat, wore checkered clothing, and wore bracelets on their arms and necks. But they had special shields, which were not used even by their neighbors. They were very small, and most often in the form of the letter H or square. The peculiarity of the Picts was that they were all always born white-haired and with bright eyes. The Picts had quite a few strange customs that were not observed not only among the Celts, but also among other Indo-European peoples in general. For example, they chose a king from the female line rather than from the male line. Also in the Picts was widespread lechery. Both men and women could cheat on each other and not hide it. And of the tribesmen, no one perceived it as treason and did not take it for treason. The Roman historian Lucius Claudius, in his diary, told a story about how Julia Domna, the wife of Emperor Septimius Severus, swore at a Pictish girl for her lewdness, but she said, "It is you Romans who secretly become mistresses of the most wretched men, while our women openly consort with the best husbands of their people by choice." Another very famous Pict tradition was to paint the bodies with all sorts of designs. Various patterns and symbols were drawn on the bodies, by which one could determine a person's status. They were painted only with blue colors. Other colors for beauty in some places were drawn different animals, trees. Pictish warriors mostly went into battle naked. In this way they showed their contempt for death in order to propitiate Teutot, father of the tribe, the god of warriors. This custom can be traced back to the Celts and some of the Germans, who had the same but very different reasons for going into battle with only a helmet, at best. The Celts wanted to flatter Teutot in this way, and the Germans simply considered fighting bareback a special bravery, showing which they automatically became Wotan's favorites in Valhalla. In the 1st century, the Romans conquered Britain, after which their lands were subjected to endless raids by the Picts. It should be noted that the Picts had a very militarized society. Most often the raids were made not by some noble leaders at the head of a professional army, but by ordinary village bums who certainly did not undertake large-scale campaigns. To protect against them, under Emperor Hadrian was built a defensive fortification. The so-called Hadrian's Wall stretched from the Irish Sea to the North Sea, but it did not give much result. The barbarians has made numerous raids and continued to do so. The Picts even sacked Londinium. That was a raid across Britain, and no Hadrian's Wall even helped. Technically, this event, also known as the Great Conspiracy, happened because the federates from among the local Celts who were serving on the ramparts decided that they were tired of serving the Romans for a pittance, which, at that time, they were not yet paid, and simply let the Picts go inland. Again, to be fair, no one in Britain was paid at all back then. The Romans realized that the Picts were a serious opponent and began to act. In the 8 Mediciati years of the same century, Theodosius the Elder inflicted a number of crushing defeats to the Picts and at the same time, Saxon pirates. The army of Theodosius passed all Britain from bottom to top, kicking out all the robbers, then invaded the territory of the Picts, defeating all already there, reached the northern coasts, and by inertia defeated the Saxons on the Orkney Islands. In 410th year, when on a throne of the Western Roman Empire already ascended Flavius Honorius Augustus, it has stopped existence of province Britannia, having deduced from there that little that remained from local legions. Romano-British did not think of anything better, as to invite on military service Germanic. And then came the many Frisians, Angles, Saxons, and Jutes to Britain. Soon there were many kingdoms in Britain, both Anglo-Saxon and Britain. There were 2 kingdoms in the north, the Pictish kingdom of Fortriu and the Scottish kingdom of Dalriada. At the beginning of the 8th century, Nectan became king of the Picts. He did much for his people. From the beginning of his reign, he tried to make friends with Northumbria, the Anglo-Saxon kingdom. He failed to do so, and the last option left was to be baptized himself and bring his tribesmen to Christ. It was not a difficult task. Christianity in the Picts in the 6th century actively spread. Columba, the patron saint of Ireland and Scotland, proved to everyone that even among the savage Picts can be successfully spread Christianity. After the baptism, the kingdom of Fortriu had a strong ally to fight against Dalriada and the Briton kingdom of Strathclyde. However, neither could be victorious. Nectan soon lost the battle of Monith Carno to another candidate for the throne, Angus. Nectan then became a monk, and Angus became king. He succeeded in conquering Dalriada, after which he made several campaigns in Ireland. Unfortunately, after his death, the kingdom was in complete confusion. The Pictish nobility came to power, then the Scottish. All this went on for more than a century. Only in the middle of the 9th century, Kenneth MacAlpin, a noble Scotsman, took power in Dalriad and then seized Fortriu, after which he organized a kind of Knight of the Long Knives, slaughtering all the Pictish and partly Scots nobles. When Kenneth conquered the Picts, the kingdom of Alba, the kingdom of the Scoto-Pict people, was proclaimed. The emergence of a strong new kingdom, whose inhabitants, though Christian, were still savage barbarians, meant one thing. It was time for the neighbors to prepare for endless raids. Throughout Alba's existence, the Scottish Picts raided Northumbria, Gwynedd, and Ireland. Sometimes the kings of Alba managed to seize power in the kingdoms of Ireland, but it happened infrequently, and such kingdoms did not live long. Kenneth's campaigns against the Anglo-Saxons, Britons, and Irish did not end well. While the king and his soldiers were fighting in Ireland, the Normans suddenly arrived from the North Sea and plundered all the northern and eastern territories of Alba. A larger campaign was made by the Danish Jarl Olaf. He wanted to establish his state on the islands to the north and northwest of Alba, but he failed. He was defeated by King Constantine MacKenneth. During the reign of Donald MacConstantine, the Vikings made a major campaign against Alba. They started as before from the northern part of the kingdom. Donald managed to defeat them at the Battle of Innisibsolian, but this did not stop the Normans. They wiped out Dunnottar, during the defense of which Donald died. It was a city in the center of Alba, and the Vikings had never gone that far. Fortunately, they decided not to continue inland. We have no information as to why the Northmen packed their bags and sailed home, but it is likely that they lost too many men in the capture of Dunnottar. In the year 93, the Vikings again made a major campaign into Alba, but at the Battle of Strathairn, they were defeated by Constantine MacIda. For the last time, they made a major campaign in the year 9060, but they did not even manage to land on the shores of Britain. Their fleet was destroyed off the island of Buchan by King Indulf. Since the 11th century, the name Alba disappears from the pages of history. It is replaced by the English word Scotland. This is most likely due to the fact that the Scottish Picts gradually moved away from their barbaric customs, adopting European culture from England, and the Picts, accordingly, moved away from their customs and adopted Scottish ones. By the end of the 11th century, they had already become quite different from their savage and warlike ancestors.